Imagine waking up in the country you were born in and realising the rules around you have changed. Not for criminals, not for newcomers, but for ordinary British families. A payslip, a visa expiry date, or an online status error can suddenly decide where your marriage survives, where your children grow up, and whether home stays home. These immigration changes are not loud or dramatic. They work quietly through paperwork, deadlines, and costs until families feel cornered. This video breaks down how policy shifts can push British citizens toward leaving without deportation, headlines, or warnings that affect everyday life. Number 1. Family visa income shock. The first rule change affecting British households is the updated family and partner visa income requirement. Under current policy, a British citizen who wants to sponsor a non-British spouse or partner must usually earn at least £29,000 per year. For many households, especially outside London, this is not a small jump. It immediately turns relationships into financial calculations, where love, stability, and shared plans depend on salary figures rather than commitment. This rule does not remove citizenship or cancel anyone's passport, but its pressure is very real. Couples who have lived together for years can suddenly face deadlines, refusals, or forced separation. If the British partner cannot meet the income threshold, the non-British partner may be required to leave when their current visa expires. At that point, families often choose to relocate together rather than live apart, effectively pushing British citizens out by circumstance rather than law. The practical response starts with planning early and honestly. British sponsors should calculate income using official guidance, including which earnings count and which do not. Savings can sometimes offset income gaps if they meet strict thresholds. Career changes, additional work hours, or relocation within the UK may help, but these are not always realistic. When the numbers simply do not work, many couples begin researching countries with more flexible family migration rules, turning a UK policy change into a life-altering decision. This shift quietly reshapes communities, workplaces, and futures as ordinary people weigh belonging against bureaucracy and discover how policy decisions reach deeply into kitchens, bedrooms, and everyday conversations nationwide today. Number 2. Skilled worker salary barrier. The second major rule impacting British households is the sharp increase in the skilled worker visa salary threshold. Many roles now require a minimum salary of £41,700 per year, or the official going rate for the occupation. Whichever is higher, for families relying on one partner transitioning from a graduate, temporary, or lower paid role into sponsored employment. This change can instantly collapse long-term plans that once seemed secure. This rule affects British citizens indirectly but powerfully. When a non-British partner cannot meet the salary requirement, sponsorship becomes impossible regardless of experience or demand for their skills. As visa expiry dates approach, households face limited options. Separation becomes one possibility, but for many couples, it is not emotionally sustainable. The alternative is relocation, often to the partner's home country or to another nation with lower income thresholds, effectively forcing British citizens to rebuild their lives elsewhere. To respond, households must treat sponsorship as a financial risk, not a guarantee. Job offers should be evaluated against official occupation codes and going rates, not assumptions or verbal promises. Negotiating salaries early is essential, as late increases rarely meet visa deadlines. Some families explore retraining into higher paid shortage roles, while others consider self-employment or overseas opportunities. What matters most is timing. Delays of weeks can end eligibility completely. This rule transforms employment into a countdown, where pay slips, contracts, and renewal dates dictate whether a family stays rooted in the UK or quietly prepares to leave, reshaping futures through administrative thresholds rather than personal choice or national loyalty alone. Number 3. Care worker dependent restriction. Another rule change reshaping British households is the restriction on dependents for care workers entering under the health and care worker route. New applicants in these roles are generally no longer allowed to bring partners or children with them. While this policy targets migration numbers, its human impact is immediate. Many care workers are married to British citizens or have built long-term relationships while already living and working in the UK. This rule does not target British citizens directly, yet it reshapes their lives in subtle but forceful ways. When a care worker cannot sponsor dependents, families must decide whether to live apart or relocate together. British partners may keep their legal right to remain, but daily life without a spouse or children quickly becomes unrealistic, pushing families toward leaving the country by sea. Choice rather than removal. Preparation is the only realistic response. Households affected by this rule must review visa timelines, entry dates, and whether transitional protections apply. Career changes into different occupation codes, retraining, or switching routes before expiry can sometimes preserve family unity. Others begin planning exits together, researching healthcare systems, housing costs, and employment abroad. The policy quietly converts caring professions into unstable foundations for family life, especially for lower-income workers. For British citizens involved, the result is rarely dramatic or public. It is a slow administrative pressure that turns love, routine, and belonging into logistical problems, gradually narrowing options until leaving feels less like a decision and more like the only workable path forward. This pressure often reshapes identities, careers, and futures long before any deadline arrives. Number 4. Student route family limit. Recent changes to the student immigration route have tightened rules around dependents, limiting who can bring family members to the United Kingdom. Only specific postgraduate research courses or government-sponsored programs allow dependents, closing a pathway many families previously relied on. British citizens married to international students often use this route as a temporary bridge while planning longer-term settlement options. But that bridge has narrowed significantly. This shift affects British households by disrupting timing rather than status. When a student visa ends and no dependent option exists, the non-British partner may have no lawful way to stay. The British citizen is not expelled, yet the family unit becomes unsustainable inside the UK. Many couples reach the same crossroads, either accept long-distance relationships or move together to another country where study, work, and family life can continue without interruption. Managing this rule requires early awareness and realistic planning. Course type, start date, and completion timelines now matter as much as emotional commitment. Families should confirm dependent eligibility before enrolling, not after arrival. Alternative routes, such as skilled work or family visas, must be prepared months in advance, with finances and documents aligned. When those routes are not viable, couples increasingly research education systems abroad, choosing stability over uncertainty. This change shows how education policy can quietly reshape migration outcomes, influencing where British citizens build futures, raise families, and define home not through force, but through restricted options that gradually close doors and reshape personal decisions. Long-term security and national belonging across generations without public debate, headlines, or clear warnings beforehand nationwide. Number 5. Immigration health surcharge pressure. The immigration health surcharge has become one of the most underestimated forces pushing British households toward leaving the UK. Non-British family members are required to pay a yearly healthcare fee upfront for the entire visa period. For multi-year visas, this can mean thousands of pounds due immediately, even before application fees, legal costs, or relocation expenses are considered by families. These costs arrive suddenly and can overwhelm savings planned for housing, children, or emergencies without warning or flexibility for lower-income households. This rule impacts British citizens indirectly through financial strain rather than legal exclusion. When a partner cannot afford the surcharge, visa renewal becomes impossible despite meeting every other requirement. Families then face an urgent choice between separation or relocation. Many choose to leave together, not because they want to, but because remaining means debt, instability, or repeated visa refusals. This financial pressure often arrives at the same time as job changes, rent increases, and childcare responsibilities, making the burden heavier for ordinary working families. Across cities and rural areas alike, households must plan for this cost early to avoid last-minute crises. Calculating total visa expenses across several years is essential, not optional. Some families delay applications to save, while others seek employers willing to contribute. When these options fail, relocation becomes a financial survival strategy. The surcharge quietly transforms healthcare access into a migration barrier, influencing where British families settle, work, and raise children long term. This change rarely feels dramatic, yet it steadily reshapes decisions made at kitchen tables nationwide over time, without headlines, speeches, or public debate. Number 6. Shrinking occupation eligibility. Another major shift comes from changes to which jobs qualify for easier sponsorship. The replacement of the old shortage occupation list with a narrower immigration salary list reduced the number of roles receiving lower salary thresholds. Many positions once considered in demand no longer receive flexibility, even when employers struggle to recruit locally. For households depending on these roles, the change quietly removes realistic pathways that once made staying in the UK possible for families planning long-term stability with it, the country they call home. This change affects British citizens through household consequences rather than nationality. When a non-British partner works in a role removed from the list, sponsorship may require salaries far above market rates. Employers often refuse, contracts end, and visa renewals fail. British partners remain legally secure, yet family life becomes unstable. Faced with separation or relocation, many choose to leave together, turning a technical adjustment into a life-altering turning point that reshapes careers, housing plans, and emotional security over time for ordinary couples across different regions nationwide today, silently. To respond, families must reassess eligibility early and realistically. Job codes, salary tables, and sponsorship rules should be checked before contracts are signed. Relying on outdated lists creates false confidence. Some households pursue retraining into qualifying roles, while others explore international opportunities together. What matters is preparation. When eligibility disappears suddenly, options narrow quickly. Planning ahead allows families to choose movement on their own terms, rather than being pushed by administrative change that affects housing, schooling, finances, and long-term emotional stability for everyone involved in shared lives ahead together. Number 7. Digital status and visa risks. The move toward fully digital immigration status through eVisas has introduced a new layer of risk for British households with non-British family members. Physical residence permits are being phased out and replaced by online records. Access it through government accounts and share codes. While presented as modern and efficient, this system places daily life behind logins, passwords, and databases that must function perfectly for work travel. Renting identification. British citizens are not required to use eVisas themselves, yet they feel the consequences when a partner's digital status fails. Errors in online records can prevent someone from starting a job, boarding a flight, or passing a right to rent check. When these problems occur near visa expiry dates, families face cascading issues. Missed work leads to lost income, delays cause overstays, and simple technical faults can escalate into serious immigration problems that affect entire households. The only defense is preparation and redundancy. Families should ensure non-British partners have active accounts, accurate passport details, and saved evidence of status. Screenshots, printed confirmations, and early employer checks reduce last-minute crises. Updating documents immediately after renewals is essential. When digital systems replace physical proof, there is little room for error. For some households, repeated failures undermine confidence in long-term stability. Over time, this uncertainty encourages relocation to countries where legal status is simpler and more tangible. The change does not remove citizenship, but it alters daily security, shaping decisions about where British families feel safe building careers, relationships, and futures without fear of invisible administrative barriers, disrupting ordinary life and family stability overall. Number 8. Employer sponsorship cost burden. The rising cost of employer sponsorship has become another quiet force pushing British households toward leaving the country. Employers sponsoring overseas workers must pay license fees, skills charges, and legal costs that can reach thousands of pounds per employee. As these costs increase, many companies reduce sponsorship altogether, especially small businesses. When sponsorship disappears, a non-British partner can lose lawful work status even while fully employed, experienced and needed creating sudden instability inside otherwise settled British families. This pressure rarely appears in official announcements, but spreads silently. This rule affects British citizens indirectly yet deeply. A British partner may have citizenship security, but their family income, housing, and future depend on continued sponsorship. When employers refuse renewal, families face deadlines rather than debates. Separation becomes an option. Relocation becomes another. Many choose to leave together not because of preference, but because one salary change removes the legal right to remain working in the UK for the non-British partner. This disruption often unfolds quickly with little warning or emotional preparation for families already stretched financially. Families must treat employer sponsorship as fragile rather than permanent. Open conversations with employers about renewal plans are essential. Saving emergency funds, updating documents early, and tracking visa timelines reduce shock. Some households shift careers, while others prepare international moves together. Rising sponsorship costs turn workplace policy into household destiny, influencing where British citizens live, raise children, and build stability over time without formal orders. Or public debate that quietly reshapes futures, decisions, and identities across communities, workplaces, and generations nationwide today, steadily and persistently over many years. Number 9. Rigid visa timelines and renewal traps. Another significant pressure comes from stricter timelines and limited flexibility around visa renewals and extensions. Many routes now require precise application windows with little tolerance for error or delay. If a renewal is submitted late or with missing documents, lawful status can end immediately. For British households relying on a non-British partner's this rigidity transforms everyday life into a calendar-driven process where dates matter more than circumstances or intent. This pressure often arrives quietly, but reshapes decisions across work, housing, and family planning for many British families. This rules affects British citizens when minor mistakes create major consequences. Illness, job loss, or family emergencies do not pause visa clocks. When an application fails, households may have days, not months, to respond. British partners may stay legally, yet their family unit fractures under urgency. Faced with impossible deadlines, many couples choose to leave together, seeking systems that allow grace periods and predictable renewal pathways. The stress builds quietly and affects mental health, finances, relationships, and long-term security for families across different regions of the UK. Today now, the only workable response is precision and contingency. Families must track expiry dates, prepare documents early, and assume no flexibility exists. Legal advice checklists and calendar reminders become survival tools rather than extras. When even careful planning fails, relocation becomes a rational decision. Over time, rigid timelines push British households to countries where systems recognise human unpredictability. This change does not expel citizens, yet it steadily redirects where lives, careers, and futures unfold, often without debate, transparency, or public understanding of the long-term consequences involved for ordinary families nationwide. Number 10. Enforcement and compliance crackdowns. Recent immigration policy has increased enforcement activity and compliance checks, placing more responsibility on sponsors, landlords, and employers. Audits, reporting duties, and penalties for errors have expanded, making many organisations cautious about engaging with immigration routes at all. For families, this means fewer willing sponsors, stricter rental checks, and heightened scrutiny during everyday processes that once felt routine and predictable across the country for thousands of households. British citizens experience the impact through disruption rather than removal. When a landlord refuses to rent to someone with complex status, or an employer delays onboarding due to compliance fears, household stability erodes quickly. Jobs fall through, housing plans collapse, and timelines compress. British partners may remain legally secure, but daily life becomes fragile. As obstacles multiply, families often decide that staying requires constant defence, while leaving offers clarity and control over their future together elsewhere abroad. The practical response is awareness and preparation. Families must ensure documents are accurate, accessible, and current at all times. Choosing reputable employers and landlords familiar with compliance reduces risk. However, constant scrutiny carries emotional cost. Over time, households weigh whether living under permanent verification is sustainable. For many, relocation becomes a rational decision, not an emotional one. Enforcement policy may aim to protect systems, but it also reshapes where British families feel able to live normally. Without expulsion or announcement, pressure accumulates until departure feels less like a loss and more like relief, redirecting lives, ambitions, and long-term plans beyond the UK, affecting children, education, careers, identities, and sense of belonging for years ahead across communities. Nationwide today, quietly. These immigration changes reveal a pattern that often goes unnoticed. British citizens are not being ordered to leave, yet many feel increasingly boxed in by rules that affect their partners, jobs, finances, and daily stability. When family visas depend on income, work visas depend on salary thresholds, and legal status depends on flawless timing and digital systems, life becomes conditional. Decisions about love, children, housing, and careers are no longer guided only by personal goals, but by whether a form is accepted or a number is high enough. Over time, this pressure changes how people define home. Leaving stops feeling like a dramatic exit and starts feeling like a practical adjustment to protect family unity, mental health, and financial security. The result is a quiet shift where British households relocate not because they want to abandon the UK, but because the system makes staying increasingly fragile. These policies reshape communities slowly, influencing where skills, family souls, and futures are built. Understanding this reality matters because it shows how immigration policy reaches far beyond borders and statistics, shaping everyday life for citizens and non-citizens alike, often without public debate or clear acknowledgement of the human cost involved. If this topic resonates with your own experience, share your thoughts in the comments. Watch our related videos to understand how policy changes affect real lives, and support the channel by subscribing so we can keep breaking down complex issues clearly.